3 years after Claire Watkins vanished into the Olympic rainforest, a biology student scraping moss from an ancient tree discovered words carved deep into the bark. CW6/25/018 help. The message stopped mid-word. Claire had carved her park ranger brother's name before something interrupted her. Nathan Reed had searched these forests for 3 years, had walked past this exact tree hundreds of times, never knowing his sister's desperate plea lay hidden beneath a thin layer of green moss. What had stopped Claire from finishing? And what truth had the forest concealed for over 1,000 days? June 25th, 2001. Morning fog rolled thick across the Olympic Peninsula as 23-year-old Claire Watkins loaded field equipment into her Subaru. The environmental science graduate student had 1 week until her thesis defense at the University of Washington. Her research on moss ecosystems in old-growth forests required visiting remote study sites where few people ventured. This morning, she planned to document moss coverage on ancient Douglas firs in a valley 8 miles from any marked trail. Margaret Watkins watched from the kitchen window as her daughter checked equipment with practiced efficiency. Rain jacket, field notebook, GPS unit, handheld radio, soil sampling kits. Claire was meticulous about preparation, a trait her older brother Nathan had drilled into her during childhood hikes through these forests. Margaret waved goodbye at 7:15 a.m., watching Claire's Subaru disappear down the gravel drive toward Highway 101. "Should be back by 6, Claire had called out. "Tell Nathan his little sister says the rainforest misses him." But Claire would never come home, and the casual message to her brother would haunt Nathan Reed for the rest of his life. Nathan, a 26-year-old park ranger stationed at Olympic National Forest headquarters, was conducting routine patrol when his radio crackled at 8:30 a.m. A trail runner had reported seeing a woman matching Claire's description walking into the forest with a man in camouflage clothing. The witness, Chloe Simmons, remembered thinking it odd that someone wore hunting gear in late June, months before hunting season. Nathan called Claire's cell phone immediately. Voicemail. He tried Daniel Harper, Claire's boyfriend who was supposed to meet her at the trailhead. Daniel answered, confused and apologetic. A flat tire had delayed him 45 minutes. He hadn't seen Claire. He didn't own camouflage clothing. He wasn't anywhere near the forest. The realization hit like a physical blow. If the man with Claire wasn't Daniel, who was he? By 9 a.m., Nathan stood at the trailhead where his sister had parked. Claire's Subaru sat locked and untouched, all her equipment still inside. His sister never entered the forest without her GPS and radio. She was too professional, too careful. Something had prevented her from following her own safety protocols. At 9:47 a.m., Nathan made the call that would consume the next 3 years of his life. Clallam County Sheriff's Office dispatched units immediately. By noon, yellow crime scene tape stretched between trees, and Detective Sarah Mitchell had arrived to lead the investigation. The Olympic National Forest presented a searcher's nightmare. Over 600,000 acres of temperate rainforest where moss grew on everything, fog reduced visibility to 20 feet, and trails vanished overnight. The forest received 12 feet of rain annually, creating conditions where human scent degraded within hours. But the community mobilized anyway. By evening, over 300 volunteers had assembled at the Port Angeles Community Center, ready to search. Search dogs deployed from Claire's Subaru, tracking north-northeast for approximately 500 yards before losing the trail completely. Rain from the previous night had degraded scent beyond recovery. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew overhead, but struggled to penetrate the dense canopy. The ancient trees, some 500 years old, formed a ceiling that blocked both satellite signals and infrared detection. As darkness fell on June 25th, search teams suspended operations. Nathan refused to leave, continuing alone through the night, calling his sister's name into fog so thick he couldn't see his own hands. Rain began falling at midnight, steady drops that turned the forest floor to mud and washed away any remaining evidence. But what investigators didn't know yet was that Claire was still alive that night, hiding in a makeshift shelter she constructed from branches and moss, writing in her field notebook by the light of matches she'd saved. The words she wrote would eventually solve the case, but they'd remain hidden for 3 more years. Margaret Watkins collapsed when Nathan called with news that Claire was missing. The phone slipped from her hands as neighbors rushed to help, By afternoon, Margaret and her ex-husband Robert had reunited at the sheriff's office, their divorce forgotten in shared terror. They sat in plastic chairs, unable to drink the coffee they'd been given, answering Detective Mitchell's methodical questions. What was Claire wearing? Did she have enemies? Was she having relationship problems? The questions felt surreal, reducing their daughter's life to checkbox data points. The second day brought more volunteers and more heartbreak. Dogs couldn't reacquire Claire's scent. Helicopter searches revealed nothing. Volunteers combed through dense undergrowth, checking ravines and creek beds, finding no trace. The Olympic rainforest, beautiful and terrible, kept its secrets. By the third day, Chloe Simmons provided more details about the man she'd seen with Claire. White male, mid-30s, average build, camouflage hunting clothes, baseball cap obscuring his face. He'd been carrying what looked like hunting equipment. Claire had seemed to be talking casually with him, showing no obvious distress. This suggested she might have known him or hadn't perceived danger. Detective Mitchell began compiling lists of everyone with forest access: park rangers, Forest Service employees, hunting guides, researchers, local residents. One name appeared frequently: Wayne Hollis, a 37-year-old wilderness guide with a reputation as a poacher. Multiple sources confirmed Hollis knew the Olympic forest intimately, used unmarked trails and game paths, often set illegal traps in remote areas. Hollis was interviewed on June 28th. He claimed he'd been in Port Angeles that morning, visiting friends. The friends confirmed his alibi, though their statements seemed vague about specific times. Hollis didn't match Chloe's description perfectly, being taller and heavier than she'd described. But fog could distort perception, and witnesses often remembered details incorrectly. What made Hollis interesting was his criminal network. Robert Chen, 34, often accompanied Hollis on poaching trips. Marcus Webb, 33, owned a gas station on Highway 101 and allegedly helped to sell illegal game meat. The three formed a loose organization that had frustrated game wardens for years. By week's end, the massive search began scaling back. Resources were finite, and statistical probability of finding Claire alive decreased with each passing hour. This transition devastated Nathan. Scaling back meant admitting his sister was probably dead. That hope was irrational. He took leave from his ranger job, spending every daylight hour searching areas the official teams had missed. As summer progressed into autumn, Claire's case slowly faded from headlines. Margaret returned to her job at the Port Angeles Library, moving through days in fog that had nothing to do with weather. Robert threw himself into logging work, seeking exhaustion that might bring dreamless sleep. Daniel Harper stayed in Port Angeles despite job offers elsewhere, unable to leave while Claire remained missing. The investigation continued quietly. Detective Mitchell built detailed timelines for Wayne Hollis, Robert Chen, and Marcus Webb, verifying alibis, examining phone records, following leads that went nowhere. This methodical work was invisible to the public, but essential for eventual prosecution. Winter brought storms that made searching impossible. Nathan used forced downtime to study topographic maps, marking searched areas, identifying gaps in coverage. The forest was too vast to search completely, but he refused to accept that his sister would never be found. As 2002 arrived without Claire, the case officially went cold. This designation didn't mean investigators quit. It meant they'd exhausted immediate leads and were now in the long accumulation of evidence that might eventually break the case. Margaret marked Claire's birthday on March 14, 2002, at a memorial garden she'd planted. Claire would have been 24, probably graduated, perhaps starting a PhD. Instead, there was emptiness and unanswered questions that made healing impossible. Nathan struggled with guilt that consumed him despite reassurances. He was a professional wilderness tracker who couldn't find his own sister. The failure felt profound and unforgivable. He replayed June 25th endlessly, wondering what he should have done differently. The summer of 2003 brought renewed hope that dissolved into fresh heartbreak. Hikers discovered a rain jacket matching Claire's description, caught on branches near a steep ravine 5 miles from where she disappeared. Forensic analysis confirmed it was Claire's jacket through DNA evidence and distinctive wear patterns. The discovery meant Claire had traveled at least 5 miles had been alive long enough to lose or discard her jacket, and had been near dangerous terrain. Searchers intensified efforts around the ravine using technical climbing equipment, but found nothing else. Just the jacket, hanging like a marker left by someone hoping to be found. Detective Mitchell theorized Claire might have shed the jacket while running if she felt overheated, or someone had forced her to leave it. The ravine location raised the possibility she'd fallen, though extensive searching below found no evidence. The jacket answered one question while raising many more. By late 2003, Margaret had transformed grief into advocacy, testifying before the state legislature about faster response protocols for wilderness disappearances. Her work led to new policies requiring immediate deployment of resources when credible reports suggested danger. Nathan continued searching through 2003 and into 2004, though less frequently as he accepted that finding Claire might require extraordinary luck. He'd covered hundreds of miles, had examined every trail he knew, had enlisted other rangers to search areas beyond his reach. The rainforest kept its secrets. Then everything changed on July 14, 2004. Emma Rodriguez, a 22-year-old University of Washington biology student, was studying moss ecosystems in the same remote areas Claire had researched. Emma had read Claire's preliminary papers and was building on that work, granted permission to access the study sites where Claire had planned to collect data. Emma was measuring moss depth on an ancient Douglas fir when she noticed something unusual. The moss didn't follow natural bark contours in one section. It appeared disturbed, then regrown. Curious, she brushed away the thick green layer. Letters appeared beneath. Carved letters, cut deep into bark years earlier, slowly covered as moss grew back. Emma's hands shook as she cleared more moss, revealing a complete message. CW 625, 2001, Nate help. The carving stopped mid-word. The final letter, presumably continuing help me, or help them, or some other plea, had never been completed. The carved lines were deep and deliberate, made with something sharp. The date matched exactly when Claire had disappeared. The initials matched her name, and Nate was her brother, the park ranger who'd searched for 3 years. Emma documented everything with photographs before calling Detective Mitchell. Within 2 hours, the tree had become a crime scene, forensic specialists examining and documenting the carving. The moss covering the message was collected and preserved as evidence of time passage. The message's location provided crucial information. Claire had traveled at least 6 miles from the trailhead, had been alive and capable of carving, and had attempted to leave information for rescuers. The incomplete word raised terrible questions. What had interrupted her? Had someone discovered her? Had she heard something that made her flee? Had exhaustion or injury prevented completion? Nathan stood before the tree for over an hour, his hand on bark near his sister's carved plea. The guilt intensified beyond endurance. He'd walked past this tree dozens of times during searches, had probably stood within feet of this spot calling Claire's name, never knowing her message lay hidden beneath moss that looked like natural forest growth. Margaret's reaction mixed relief at finally having new evidence with renewed grief about what Claire must have endured. The message meant Claire had survived initial encounter with whoever took her, had traveled miles through difficult forest, had been thinking clearly enough to leave information. But something beyond this tree had prevented her from ever making it home. The discovery reinvigorated investigation. Detective Mitchell's team deployed to the forest with modern technology unavailable in 2001. Better GPS, improved ground-penetrating radar, more sensitive cadaver dogs. The hope was that Claire's remains might be nearby, that the tree marked close to the end of her journey. Searchers found additional evidence within half a mile. A makeshift shelter constructed from branches and moss, crude but functional, hidden in a small ravine. Inside, fabric scraps that forensic analysis confirmed came from pants Claire had worn. Near the shelter, remains of a small fire pit, and within that pit, partially burned paper that appeared to be pages from a field notebook. Forensic document specialists worked for weeks recovering text from burned fragments. Most was too damaged, but one piece approximately 3 inches square survived with legible writing in Claire's handwriting. June 26th morning. Hit all night. He is looking. Tried to go north to Ranger Station but lost compass in creek. So cold. Have to keep moving or hypothermia. If anyone finds this poacher, named Wayne from Port Angeles, tell Nathan the text ended there, torn or burned away. But those sentences provided the breakthrough investigators needed. Wayne Hollis was directly connected to Claire's disappearance by her own testimony. The mention of a lost compass explained why she'd become disoriented. The description of cold and hypothermia suggested what had killed her. Most significantly, Claire's note confirmed she'd hidden from Wayne, that he'd actively searched for her, that this was kidnapping at minimum. Detective Mitchell obtained warrants to search Hollis's property. The search revealed disturbing collections of illegal hunting equipment and evidence of extensive poaching operations. Cold storage units contained game meat from dozens of illegally killed animals, furs from protected species, equipment for processing illegal wildlife products. What proved significant was a multi-tool knife found in Hollis's truck. Forensic analysis showed the blade matched width and characteristics of the tool used to carve Claire's message. The knife had minute traces of bark embedded in the blade. While 3 years made definitive proof impossible, it established Hollis possessed a tool that could have made the carving. More damaging was testimony from Robert Chen. When confronted with evidence and offered a plea agreement, Chen provided detailed account of June 25, 2001. According to Chen, Hollis had been setting illegal traps that morning when he encountered Claire at a research site. Claire, being conscientious, had photographed the traps and informed Hollis she was reporting him to authorities. Hollis had panicked. He already faced potential charges for previous incidents, and new evidence from a credible university researcher would likely mean serious jail time. According to Chen, Hollis convinced Claire to walk with him to where his truck was parked, claiming he would voluntarily report himself. Claire, trusting and wanting to handle things properly, agreed. But deep in the forest, Hollis's story changed. Chen claimed Hollis confessed to attempting to intimidate Claire into destroying photographs and forgetting what she'd seen. When Claire refused and tried using her radio for help, Hollis took the radio and her cell phone, leaving her stranded without communication. He then left, apparently believing she'd eventually find her way out, but would be too afraid to report him. Chen's testimony didn't align with all evidence. If Hollis simply abandoned Claire and left, why had her note indicated he was still looking for her the next day? Investigators theorized Hollis initially left but returned, either to ensure Claire couldn't report him or to retrieve traps before they could be discovered and linked to him. Marcus Webb provided additional testimony strengthening the case. Webb stated that on June 25th evening, Hollis appeared at the gas station visibly shaken, asking to use the phone to call Robert Chen. Webb overheard parts of conversation where Hollis mentioned the environmental student, and she knows about the traps. Webb hadn't understood significance then, but remembered because Hollis had been unusually agitated. Armed with testimony from 2 witnesses and physical evidence, including the knife and Claire's written identification of Wayne from Port Angeles, prosecutors moved forward. On September 2, 2004, more than 3 years after Claire disappeared, Wayne Hollis was arrested and charged with kidnapping and criminally negligent homicide. The arrest made headlines across Washington state. The community that had searched tirelessly responded with relief and anger. Relief that someone was being held accountable. Anger that it had taken so long and that Claire's body still hadn't been recovered. Hollis maintained innocence, claiming he'd never met Claire and that Chen and Webb were lying to save themselves. His defense argued evidence was circumstantial, that bark on a knife proved nothing, that testimony from admitted criminals seeking deals shouldn't be trusted. They pointed out no physical evidence directly connected Hollis to Claire beyond circumstantial links. But prosecution had something more powerful, Claire's own words. The burned notebook fragment where she'd written "poacher named Wayne from Port Angeles" came from Claire herself, victim identifying attacker before death. That testimony from beyond the grave carried enormous weight. The trial began March 2005, nearly 4 years after Claire's disappearance. The Port Angeles courthouse had never seen anything like it. Every gallery seat filled with community members wearing purple ribbons in Claire's memory. Margaret Watkins sat front row every day, face composed but eyes reflecting years of pain. Nathan sat beside her, finally confronting that his sister was gone, and best hope now was justice. Prosecution presented methodically. They established Claire's routine and plans. They documented her last confirmed sighting. They presented Chloe Simmons' testimony about seeing Claire with a man in camouflage. They walked jury through 3 years of searching and eventual discovery of Claire's carved message and burned notebook. Robert Chen's testimony provided dramatic moments. He described Hollis's poaching operation, establishing motive for silencing Claire. He recounted conversations where Hollis expressed worry about the environmental student. He testified Hollis returned from Forest June 25th, acting strange and worried, had asked Chen to provide alibi, and later admitted he dealt with the student problem. Marcus Webb corroborated key elements and provided his own account of Hollis's behavior immediately after Claire's disappearance. Gas station security footage from June 25th, though grainy, showed Hollis's truck arriving early evening and Hollis entering to use phone, matching Webb's testimony. Defense attempted discrediting Chen and Webb, highlighting criminal histories and plea agreements, reducing sentences for testimony. They argued both had motivation to lie, to blame Hollis for crime they might have participated in or known about. They suggested evidence was equally consistent with Chen or Webb being responsible. But defense couldn't explain Claire's written words. They tried arguing Wayne from Port Angeles might refer to someone else, that it was common enough name. When prosecutors presented evidence, Hollis was the only Wayne in Port Angeles area known for poaching, argument lost credibility. Forensic evidence regarding shelter and fire pits supported prosecution timeline. Experts testified Claire survived at least 2 days in forest, had constructed shelter and managed fire, had attempted navigating north toward ranger station she believed was 15 miles away. They explained losing compass and GPS in unfamiliar forest during fog and rain made navigation nearly impossible. Medical experts testified about hypothermia, explaining how rain and wind strip away body heat faster than body can generate it. They walked jury through what Claire's final hours probably entailed: growing confusion, loss of coordination, eventually lying down in what seemed comfortable sleep but was actually body shutting down. Testimony was clinically precise but emotionally devastating. Margaret wept quietly as experts described her daughter's probable death. Nathan sat rigid, forcing himself to listen because Claire deserved someone bearing witness to her suffering. Defense argued Hollis was being scapegoated for tragic accident, that Claire simply got lost during field work, that references to Wayne might have been confused thoughts from hypothermia-induced delirium. They pointed out hundreds got lost in wilderness annually, and tragic outcomes didn't always indicate criminal activity. But prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. They presented evidence Claire was an experienced hiker and researcher who knew forest well. They showed meticulous research notes and safety protocols. They demonstrated she'd never left for field work without proper equipment and check-in procedures. Something had gone terribly wrong, preventing Claire from following normal safety practices. Jury deliberated 6 hours before returning verdict. Courtroom was silent as foreman stood to read decision. Guilty of kidnapping. Guilty of criminally negligent homicide. The words hung in air. Years of uncertainty finally resolved into definitive judgment. Wayne Hollis had taken Claire Watkins into forest, had left her without means of communication or navigation, and had caused her death through criminal actions. Sentencing hearing 2 weeks later allowed Margaret, Nathan, and others to address court. Margaret spoke about Claire's dreams and potential, about research she'd never complete, about grandchildren who'd never be born. She looked directly at Hollis and said, "You took my daughter from me. You took her from a world that needed her. I hope you spend every day of your sentence thinking about what you've done." Nathan's statement was shorter but equally powerful. He spoke as both Claire's brother and park ranger who understood wilderness dangers. He explained Hollis's actions had been murder disguised as abandonment, that leaving someone without communication equipment in that forest during bad weather was effectively a death sentence. He told court he'd never forgive himself for not finding Claire sooner, but Hollis bore full responsibility for putting her in a situation where she couldn't be found. Judge Don Ash sentenced Wayne Hollis to life in prison without parole for kidnapping, plus 30 years for criminally negligent homicide. Judge stated Hollis's actions demonstrated callous disregard for human life in attempts to cover up crime by leaving Claire to die alone in wilderness warranted maximum sentence. Robert Chen received 15 years for his role in poaching and initially lying to investigators. Marcus Webb received 10 years for similar charges. Both men's cooperation had been essential to securing Hollis's conviction, but they'd participated in criminal activities and delayed justice by not coming forward sooner. Months following conviction brought a strange mixture of closure and renewed grief. Justice had been served. The man responsible would spend life in prison, but Claire was still gone and her body had never been recovered. Margaret continued hoping someone might stumble across remains that could be properly buried. Nathan returned to ranger work, but the job would never be the same. Every search and rescue call reminded him of Claire. Every lost hiker he found alive felt like partial redemption. He became wilderness safety advocate, giving presentations to schools and community groups about proper equipment, communication devices, and safety protocols. In 2006, Margaret established Claire Watkins Memorial Scholarship for environmental science students at University of Washington. Scholarship provided funding for field research with requirement that recipients follow strict safety protocols and check-in procedures. First recipient was a young woman studying climate change impacts on forest ecosystems, continuing work Claire had begun. Emma Rodriguez, student who discovered Claire's carved message, graduated with honors and went on to complete PhD in forest ecology. In her dissertation acknowledgments, she wrote, "For Claire Watkins, who loved these forests and left a message that reminds us to look carefully at what we might otherwise miss." Daniel Harper eventually moved to Oregon for forestry work. He married and started family, but never forgot Claire or stopped participating in searches for other missing persons in Pacific Northwest. In 2008, hikers discovered human remains in remote ravine approximately 3 miles from where Claire's shelter had been found. Forensic analysis and dental records confirmed remains were Claire's. Location suggested she'd been attempting to continue north toward Ranger Station when she'd either fallen or collapsed from hypothermia. The ravine, steep and hidden by vegetation, explained why extensive searches had never located her body. Discovery allowed family to finally lay Claire to rest. Her funeral, held 7 years after disappearance, drew hundreds. Service celebrated her life, dedication to environmental science, kindness to others, and courage during final days when she'd fought desperately to survive. Margaret spoke at funeral, voice steady despite tears. She talked about little girl who'd loved tide pools and collected pine cones. She described teenager who'd chosen environmental science to make world better. She honored young woman who demonstrated incredible courage when faced with circumstances no one should endure. And she thanked community for never giving up on Claire. Nathan placed first handful of earth on Claire's coffin, fulfilling promise to see his sister properly buried. Act provided closure of a sort, though guilt would never entirely fade. He'd learned to live with it, to channel it into positive action through work and advocacy. Years that followed brought gradual healing. Acute pain transformed into something more bearable. Sadness that coexisted with joy rather than consuming everything. Margaret continued advocacy work, helping other families navigate nightmare of having loved ones disappear. Robert remained involved in grandchildren's lives, seeing Claire's spirit in their curiosity about nature. Nathan found purpose in ranger work and teaching wilderness safety. In 2010, Margaret published a book about Claire's disappearance and 3-year search for answers. Hidden in Moss, a mother's search for her daughter, became a resource for other families dealing with missing persons cases. Book proceeds funded scholarship bearing Claire's name and supported wilderness safety education programs. Pacific Northwest Missing Persons Community recognized Margaret as leader and advocate, someone who transformed personal tragedy into systemic change helping others. She testified before Congress about need for better coordination between agencies when people disappeared in areas spanning multiple jurisdictions. Her testimony contributed to legislation improving communication protocols and resource sharing for wilderness search operations. By 2015, Claire Watkins' case had become touchstone in discussions about wilderness safety, victim rights, and importance of persistence in seeking justice. Law enforcement training programs used case to demonstrate how patient detective work and community cooperation could solve difficult cold cases. 3-year gap between disappearance and carved message discovery became a reminder that evidence could be hidden in unexpected places and giving up was never acceptable. In 2018, on what would have been Claire's 40th birthday, University of Washington dedicated new research station in her name, Claire Watkins Field Station, located in Olympic National Forest with proper permits and safety infrastructure, provided students safe base for conducting research Claire had loved. Station included modern communication equipment, GPS tracking for all researchers, and mandatory check-in protocols, making it impossible for anyone to disappear without immediately triggering search operations. Dedication ceremony brought together hundreds whose lives Claire had touched. Margaret, now in her 60s but still active in advocacy work, cut ribbon alongside university president. She spoke about Claire's passion for these forests and how fitting her legacy included facility, allowing other students to safely pursue similar research. Nathan gave tour of surrounding forest to students who'd be using field station. He pointed out types of old-growth trees Claire had studied, explained moss ecosystems she'd documented, emphasized safety protocols protecting future researchers. He told them about Claire's final days, not to frighten but to ensure they understood real dangers these beautiful forests presented. As ceremony concluded, Margaret walked a spot overlooking forest canopy. Views stretched miles, endless green punctuated by massive crowns of old-growth trees that had stood for centuries. Somewhere beneath that canopy was tree-bearing Claire's carved message, monument to her daughter's spirit that would outlast any human-made memorial. Pacific Northwest wilderness, beautiful and terrible, had taken Claire's life, but also preserved her final message for 3 years until someone found it. Same forest that hidden evidence eventually revealed it, concealed remains, then gave them up when time was right. There was lesson in that about patience and faith and importance of never giving up hope even when hope seemed irrational. Story of Claire Watkins represented more than solved cold case or criminal successfully prosecuted. It demonstrated power of community persistence, importance of forensic science and patient detective work, and reality that wilderness, however beautiful, demanded respect and preparation. It showed families could survive unimaginable loss while maintaining grace. And it proved messages left in desperation might wait years to be found, but could still lead to justice and closure. Wayne Hollis remained in prison, maintaining innocence despite overwhelming evidence. His appeals were denied repeatedly, courts finding conviction based on solid evidence and proper procedure. He would die in prison, name forever associated with crime that shocked Pacific Northwest. Robert Chen and Marcus Webb served sentences and were released, both forever marked by association with Claire's death. They lived quietly, avoiding publicity, perhaps carrying guilt about not speaking up sooner or not preventing Hollis from taking actions that killed innocent young women. Moss continued growing on ancient trees. Fog rolled through valleys. Rain fell in patterns measured by centuries. And somewhere in Olympic National Forest, carved letters remained visible on tree that would stand another 500 years. Permanent testament to Claire Watkins and message she'd left for her brother. Nate, help. Sentence would never be completed. Help had come too late. But message had been found. Justice had been served. And Claire's legacy lived on through students following her path into these forests, armed with better equipment, stronger protocols, and cautionary tale of what could happen when things went terribly wrong. Margaret continued advocacy work into her 70s, speaking at conferences, supporting families, ensuring Claire's story remained known. She'd learned to carry grief alongside joy, to honor daughter's memory while embracing life. Pain never disappeared entirely, but no longer defined every moment. She'd found meaning in tragedy and helped countless others do same. Nathan eventually retired from Forest Service, but continued leading search and rescue training as volunteer. He'd trained hundreds of rangers and volunteers in proper search techniques, emphasizing importance of thoroughness and never assuming evidence would be obvious. Every person he trained was another chance to ensure someone else's sister wouldn't be lost for 3 years because searchers didn't know to look beneath moss. Claire Watkins Memorial Scholarship continued supporting environmental science students, ensuring each year young people passionate about protecting wilderness could pursue research safely. Recipients carried forward Claire's work, studying climate change impacts, documenting ecosystem changes, advocating for forest conservation. Their research papers often included acknowledgments of Claire, recognition they stood on foundations she'd helped establish. On quiet mornings when fog rolled through Olympic Peninsula, when Forest looked exactly as it had that June day in 2001, Margaret sometimes drove to Memorial Garden planted years earlier. She sat on stone bench surrounded by Claire's favorite flowers, now mature plants blooming reliably each season. She thought about daughter, about life cut short and potential never realized. But she also thought about lives saved by improved safety protocols, families helped by advocacy work, students supported by scholarships, and justice that eventually prevailed. Story of Claire Watkins would remain forever tragedy, promising life ended too soon by criminal actions and wilderness indifference. But it was also a story of persistence, community, and refusal to let evil have final word. In carved message hidden beneath moss, in scholarship supporting future scientists, in improved safety protocols protecting researchers, in advocacy helping other families, Claire's presence endured. Olympic rainforest, ancient and indifferent, continued its cycles. But carved into one of its oldest trees was evidence humans had been here, had suffered here, had left messages hoping for rescue. And eventually, after 3 years hidden beneath green moss, that message had been found. Justice delayed but not denied. Truth obscured but not destroyed. Message remained carved in tree. CW 625th, 2001, Nate help, incomplete, interrupted. But ultimately, after 3 years of waiting, found. And through that finding, justice was served, closure achieved, and young woman's final plea was finally answered. The Olympic rainforest still stands today, ancient and unchanging. That carved tree remains somewhere in the wilderness, moss slowly covering Claire's words again, nature reclaiming what humans briefly exposed. But the message served its purpose. It waited 3 years beneath green moss for the right person to find it. It convicted a killer. It brought a family closure. And it reminds us that even when hope seems irrational, even when years pass without answers, the truth can still emerge from the most unexpected places. This case raises questions that haunt anyone who studies it. What if Emma Rodriguez had studied a different tree that day? What if she'd never brushed away that moss? What if Nathan had examined trees more carefully during his searches? The proximity of discovery to disaster, of justice to permanent mystery, reveals how fragile truth can be. One different decision, one tree passed by, and Wayne Hollis might never have faced justice. Claire's message might still be hidden today, slowly disappearing as bark grew over carved letters, as moss thickened, as time erased evidence that could have convicted her killer. But there's another question that demands consideration. How many other messages are out there right now, hidden in forests and deserts and mountains, carved or written by desperate people hoping for rescue that hasn't come? How many families wait for answers while evidence lies concealed beneath moss or sand or snow, waiting for someone to look in exactly the right place at exactly the right time? The statistical reality is sobering. Hundreds of people disappear in American wilderness every year. Most are found. Some aren't, and some, like Claire, leave messages that wait years or decades or forever to be discovered. The Claire Watkins case also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust and danger. Wayne Hollis wasn't a stranger who emerged from shadows. He was a known member of the community, someone who guided tourists through forests, someone people recognized and trusted. Claire likely didn't perceive immediate danger when she encountered him because he belonged in that environment. He had legitimate reason to be there. This is the pattern that repeats in many disappearance cases. The danger doesn't announce itself. It wears camouflage and speaks casually and seems ordinary until it's too late. For Nathan Reed, the guilt will never fully disappear. He was a professional wilderness tracker who walked past his sister's message hundreds of times without seeing it. That's not his failure. It's the forest's power. Moss conceals, fog obscures, rain washes away. Even experts with training and equipment can miss evidence that's literally inches away. But knowing that intellectually doesn't ease the emotional weight of what-ifs. What if he'd been more thorough? What if he'd scraped moss from every tree? What if he'd searched one more day before darkness fell? These questions don't have answers, only the reminder that sometimes our best efforts aren't enough, and we have to find ways to live with that reality. Margaret Watkins transformed her unimaginable loss into advocacy that has helped hundreds of other families. Her work led to faster response protocols, better coordination between agencies, and support systems for families navigating the nightmare of having someone disappear. This is how some people survive tragedy, by ensuring their suffering creates meaning, by turning pain into purpose. Not everyone can do this. Not everyone should feel obligated to do this. But for Margaret, helping others became the way she honored Claire's memory while giving her own continued existence meaning. The moss-covered message represents something larger than one case or one family's tragedy. It symbolizes how nature preserves evidence even as it conceals it, how time can work both for and against justice, how hope and persistence can triumph over years of uncertainty. That carved tree stands as an unofficial memorial to everyone who's ever disappeared into wilderness, everyone who's ever left a message hoping for rescue, everyone who's ever fought to survive against overwhelming odds. If you found this case as compelling and heartbreaking as we did, we need your help keeping these stories alive. Cases like Claire's don't stay in public consciousness by accident. They require people who care enough to share, to comment, to ensure these victims aren't forgotten. Drop a comment below telling us what struck you most about this case. Was it Nathan's guilt? Margaret's strength? The 3 years the message waited to be found? Your engagement helps these videos reach more people, which means more awareness, which means more pressure to solve other cold cases still waiting for answers. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We cover cold cases from across America, focusing on stories that deserve more attention, families that deserve justice, and mysteries that demand answers. Every week we bring you cases like Claire's, meticulously researched, respectfully presented, and dedicated to honoring victims while demanding accountability for those responsible. Your subscription directly supports our ability to research these cases, to travel to locations, to interview families and investigators, to keep these stories alive when others have moved on to newer headlines. Share this video with someone who loves true crime or someone who hikes in wilderness areas. Claire's story is a cautionary tale about wilderness safety, about the importance of communication equipment and check-in protocols, about how quickly situations can deteriorate even for experienced people. But it's also a story about never giving up, about communities that rally together, about families that refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten, and about justice that can be delayed but ultimately delivered. Before you go, take a moment to look at Claire's photograph. She was 23 years old, passionate about protecting forests, days away from completing her master's degree, planning a future that was stolen by a poacher who valued his illegal operation more than human life. She fought to survive in that rainforest. She carved a message hoping someone would find it. She endured cold and fear and the growing realization that she might not make it out alive. And even in those final hours, even when hope must have seemed impossible, she kept trying. That courage deserves to be remembered. That life deserves to be honored. And that message, hidden for 3 years beneath green moss, deserves to remind us that evidence can wait patiently for justice to arrive. The Olympic National Forest continues its ancient cycles today, indifferent to human drama that played out beneath its canopy 23 years ago. Fog still rolls through valleys. Moss still grows thick on old-growth trees. Rain still falls in patterns measured by centuries. And somewhere in that vast wilderness, a carved tree stands as testament to Claire Watkins, to her courage, to her family's perseverance, and to a message that waited 3 years to be found, but ultimately helped convict her killer and brought her home. Remember Claire's name, share her story, and if you ever find yourself in wilderness, whether experienced or novice, whether professional or recreational, remember that even experts can become victims when criminals operate in remote areas. Carry communication equipment, follow check-in protocols, tell people exactly where you're going and when you'll return, and trust your instincts if something feels wrong, and understand that the beauty of places like the Olympic rainforest comes with real danger that demands respect and preparation. This case is closed. Justice was served. But hundreds of other cases remain open. Hundreds of other families still wait for answers. Hundreds of other messages might still be hidden in wilderness across America. Your engagement with content like this helps keep pressure on law enforcement to pursue cold cases, helps families know they're not forgotten, and helps ensure that victims like Claire are remembered for who they were, not just how they died. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for helping us honor Claire Watkins' memory by ensuring her story reaches people who need to hear it. Subscribe, comment, share, and we'll see you in the next case. Justice for Claire, peace for her family, and hope that other families still waiting will eventually find the answers they deserve. This case remains a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of never giving up, and the reality that sometimes truth waits years in the most unlikely places before revealing itself to those determined enough to keep searching.